On this week's episode of Amari Purple Talk, let's get the time and the revolution into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, the Batman, the purple spotlight on saying it loud, your bad self, and more. Amari Purple Talk starts now.
That's right, it's Amari Purple Talk. It's a Prince podcast. We talk about Prince. We talk about a lot of Prince, music, books, albums, movies, and we also talk about other stuff too. So enjoy the show. Peace. Good call.
Welcome to episode 44 of Amari Purple Talk, a Prince podcast where I share my thoughts on the Prince musical singularity. I'm Richard Cole, your imagination funk soloist, and let's dive right on in. And we're going to start with the campaign to get the time and the revolution into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. All right, so longtime listeners of Amari Purple Talk know that it has been my personal campaign to get the time, the original 7, into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I have done an episode, and I've also done a special Amari Purple Talk that basically puts forth my reasons why the time should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So when I did this at first, of course I got a lot of positive feedback for having the time into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and I've also got a lot of pushback as well. Basically, I think it's just people that just don't like the time. They're saying, no, I don't want them in there. Or it could be individuals that feel like, well, Prince is in there already and he did everything on it. So that's a valid argument as well. However, I go into great detail in the Amari Purple Talk special about the time deserving to be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And we'll kind of go over some of that as well. But I've also recently seen some posts campaigning for the Revolution to be in the Hall of Fame. And you know what? I think they both deserve to be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And I feel it should happen in 2021. And I feel that they should, both should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame same year, 2021, or even 2022 at the latest. But I want to shoot for 2021. And I think it would be a great idea, and I really don't want to politicize the situation, but to give it a slight nudge for, and not just because, I mean, they're both highly talented musicians. And in a minute, I'll go into the criteria in which both the time and the revolution do qualify for induction into the Hall of Fame. And it's not just because Jam and Lewis are this big billion-dollar production team, or that Wendy and Lisa have become very respected film composers. It's beyond that. So we'll get into that in just a moment. But like I said, I do feel that, especially kind of to bring some positive energy, some positive spirit, there's a lot that has happened in Minneapolis. A lot of changes, or at least the doors are open to positive change. And put it this way, like I said, don't want to politicize it, because there are a lot of agendas that are attaching themselves that have little or nothing to do with Black Lives Matter. And that's just my personal perspective on it. So, in other words, we don't want a state of total anarchy. You want to replace a negative situation with a positive situation. And like I said, hopefully those doors will open. Now, with that being said, having both the time and the revolution, because I think, at least symbolically speaking, you have the time, which was the epitome of not just R&B and funk, but as far as the 80s, they were that band. They sort of kicked open the doors for bands like Fishbone, even bands like Living Colour, to come into the equation. And yes, Prince was the driving force, the producer, the main songwriter, but at least with the first two albums, there was definite collaboration with Prince and Morris Day on the outcome of those albums. And to an extent, with Ice Cream Castles, Prince, Morris, and Jesse Johnson. And mind you, the Pandemonium album was sort of almost a 50-50 split. You had the Prince produced tracks, which were about 4 or 5 tracks, as well as members of the time, being Jammin' Lewis, Jesse, and Monty, contributing, or all 7 contributing to original tracks for that album without Prince's input. So, and they're a highly successful touring band. They gave Prince a run for his money back in the 80s during that Triple Threat tour, even kind of the tour before that during the controversy period as well. And, you know, given how the time, when they were originally Flight Time, you also had Prince, Morris Day, and Andre with Grand Central when they were in high school, in competing bands, the community centers that nurtured music in schools, music programs, sports programs that kept kids off the street, gave them something to do, something positive to shoot for. The time represent the best outcome from that era and would lend a tremendous voice of positivity, you know, stating to the world that, you know, Minneapolis is on the map, and they would be examples of rising out of the face of adversity. Meanwhile, you also have the revolution, which Prince on purpose modeled after the dynamics of Sly and the Family Stone. And Sly and the Family Stone represented that sort of inclusive culture. You know, there's Sly and the Family Stone tracks that are unapologetically pro-black. But there's a lot of songs like Everyday People. There's songs like I Want to Take You Higher. Those grabbed a people. You know, they weren't just black records. They weren't just rock records. And Sly, with his songwriting skill, was able to blend a lot of styles as well. You know, whether it was the Stax sound, the Motown sound, James Brown's thing, the Beatles, melding that in. And on top of that, Sly in college majored in music theory and studied Bach heavily. So a lot of that came into the mix to where, like I said, a lot of the classic Sly and the Family Stone singles, albums, they captured a people. And if you don't believe what I'm talking about, seek out, at least if nothing else, the Woodstock film and check out Sly and the Family Stone's performance on that. If you want to see or hear that in its entirety, the complete set or his complete set from Woodstock, that is available on CD and on vinyl. I have the vinyl version. I picked it up last year's record store day. And this is, when you read the beautiful ones and you read about how Prince and his dad went to go see the Woodstock film, that was one of the takeaways, not only just for Prince, for the both of them, because his father had one impression that, we're just going to see a bunch of drugged out kids on film. But they bonded over seeing Sly and the Family Stone, seeing Santana, seeing Hendrix, and a lot of the other acts. But definitely check that out. And that was something that was unheard of at the time, to have a band of any sort, but a rock band, let alone a rock band that had black and white members, male and female. Now, maybe down with Stax, you did have Booker T and the MGs, where you had two brothers, you had two white cats playing together. But Sly and the Family Stone, that dynamic represented what we all pretty much think America should be. And not just America, the world at large should be. Where we're working together, we're playing together. No one's subservient to the other. Each has an I can't talk anymore. A very special part to play in the bigger picture, and working together in harmony. So to have both, that represents the basic foundation of, fighting for freedom and equality. And like I said, Prince was very pro-black. So, don't get it twisted. Yes, there was the love for one another and we all should get along, but he was not blind to being disenfranchised. He wasn't just disenfranchised with just dealing with Warner Brothers. Growing up in Minneapolis, you're dealing with being disenfranchised. Growing up in any inner city, you're dealing with being disenfranchised. So to have one of the best bands in R&B, funk music with the time, like I said, coming out of that same area that Prince came out of and overcoming adversity, even with Jesse Johnson coming up out of East St. Louis and Rock Island, Illinois, dealing with a lot of adversity and disenfranchisement there as well. For all 7 of these cats to come up and survive, that's something to champion. That's something the world at large needs to see. Not everybody tops themselves off with drugs. Not everybody tops themselves off, getting into crime or whatever. That is not the total black experience. Let's elevate and support that. The fact that these brothers survived, with all the odds against them. But luckily there were programs in place that they chose to focus on something positive. And the other side of Prince's vision as well. Let's focus on that too. So yeah, definitely to have the both of them in, definitely at the same time at that, that's a huge statement. But like I said, it's not just about making a statement. So here we go as to why musically, which is the important part of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But rock and roll has always been about rebellion. And oftentimes it's also been about social change. It's not always Bob Dylan, that was the voice of a generation. It's not just about the Beatles or John Lennon or George Harrison, whatever, you got Curtis Mayfield in there representing, James Brown, who we'll get to a little bit later as well about that. But what I'm saying as far as music, not just the social change, but a music that's been the trendsetter or the foundation for a lot of styles that came later, whether it's hip hop or punk or whatever, or it opened the door for reggae to be accepted within the rock establishment as well. And needs some more reggae acts in there as well too. But musically, they deserve to get in there. And here's the thing, like I said, for all you detractors out there, never mind whether you like the time or whether you like the revolution or not. Music is subjective, and that's okay. It's okay for you to not like something, but just to blindly dismiss it. Because here's the thing, whatever band or artist that you do like, the criteria for being inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame supports even your argument for your favorite artist or favorite band or favorite whoever that has not yet been inducted and may have been eligible for years. Now, in the show notes, I'll post the link to the Amari Purple Talk special for the time being eligible for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So I'll if you want to listen to that in its entirety, by all means, definitely check that out and then come back here if you like. So what I'll do is I'll try to be brief and just pull up my notes from that episode and just go over a few key points here. So basically, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame documents the history of rock music and the artists, producers, engineers, and other notable figures who have influenced its development. Okay. Now, the categories are the performers category, which I like to call the legends category. And basically, the performers category is basically what you see every year when they announce the current class, and they have the big ceremony on, I think, is it HBO now? But they televise that and it's broadcast on HBO. So the main people, your James Brown, your Beatles, your Elvis, Little Richard, Chuck Berry, Stevie Wonder, the Jacksons, those are your performers category. Aretha Franklin. It's a shame Shaka Khan didn't get it this year, so we're going to throw her into this too. There was a point where Shaka wasn't getting any kind of love whatsoever for like a week or so, but yeah, Shaka Khan and Rufus damn sure deserve to be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as well. There's a talk of a slight of women in there. Janet Jackson is in, but also too, Pat Benatar deserves to be in as well. So anyways, but that's the performers category. And you also have singers. So Whitney Houston is inducted into the Hall of Fame. Again, Aretha Franklin. There's also a couple of older singers. I can't think of their names, but prior to rock and roll. Probably like Ruth Brown or something. People that have been around prior to rock and roll coming into play that was influential in your early rock and roll artists. Vocal groups, so that's your Temptations, Spinners, Four Tops, doo-wop groups from back in the day, your Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons, those cats. Bands. So I guess what I'm getting at here, instrumentalists of all kinds as well. So if somebody like a Les Paul, who definitely revolutionized the guitar by coming up with the Gibson Les Paul guitar, you know, you'd have no Keith Richards and Jimi Hendrix and Eric Clapton and none of that, you know. Now, they might still be playing Fenders, but hence, you know, like I said, any type of instrumentalist that was influential. Let's see, Ringo Starr pretty much, I think, was inducted on that basis. You know, and for all you Ringo haters out there, just shut up, because he played with taste, he was always on time, and he played for the song. So you didn't miss the point of any Beatles song. Any other drummer would have basically ruined it, because you would have missed what John or Paul was trying to say, because the drummer was trying to do acrobatics the whole time. They wouldn't have worked with Keith Moon as the drummer. You know, Keith Moon worked damn sure for the Who, but anyway, I'm digressing. But anyway, so when it comes to bands, and we'll start in the case of Revolution, this kind of fits this criteria as well. With the Revolution, they would be kind of like what the Crickets were to Buddy Holly, or let's see, the Comets to Bill Haley, the Famous Flames to James Brown, or the JBs to James Brown, where their contributions, if not on record or not just on record, their contributions to the live portion of a Buddy Holly, Bill Haley. I mean, you can take, say, the Memphis Horns as another example of that. Their contributions, not only to all of those Stax records, or the Funk Brothers to Motown, you know, whether on damn sure on record or also on stage as well. The impact that they had as a studio ensemble or studio musician, James Jamerson, I could just go on. But those things alone will justify an induction into the Hall of Fame. So it's not just your legends. That's for the TV. That's for the ratings. And I mean, also because they've paid their dues, and everyone that has been inducted is worthy of it. Now, there's controversies, but those I will, if you go listen to the Amari Purple Talk special, I cover those quite a bit. But long story short, there are enough categories that would justify both the time and the revolution as inductees into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. There is an award for musical excellence, and this used to be called the Sidemen Award, or Sidemen Award Veteran. And this is for veteran session and concert players who are selected by a committee composed of primarily producers. So, like I said, somebody like James Burton, for example. He's played with Rick Nelson. He's also played with Elvis. Like I said, a lot of contributions to both of those artists' studio recordings, as well as the live ensemble, but a very influential guitarist for a lot of bands that were coming up in the 60s and 70s. Let me see, trying to think who else. Cats like there's documentaries. Check out one called The Wrecking Crew, and that's about these LA musicians, both black and white, that played on a lot of records. Carol Kay is one. She's a female bass player. Really great bass player. Has played on Beach Boys sessions. Sonny and Cher, The Beat Goes On. That's her bass line on that. But a lot of those they've played on the Monkees records. A lot of even not even just rock and roll, but even like say Frank Sinatra, stuff like that. So a lot of jazz stuff as well. So those type of artists or those type of session players, I'm sure a lot of them have already been inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. If not, should be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Standing in the Shadows about the Funk Brothers, definitely check that documentary out if you can find it. Yeah, I mean, God, there should be a documentary on Prince musicians too, on that scale. I know it's kind of weird because Prince played on the records, but the time, the revolution, any incarnation of the new power generation, the family, Jesse Johnson, man, when they bring it to the stage, they bring it to the stage. They bring their A game to the stage. So again, like I said, these are criterias in which both bands qualify. And they deserve to get in. And like I said, I've been doing these and I'll keep doing these about the time. Like I said, I'll add the revolution. Also, too, Prince has not been inducted into the Songwriters Hall of Fame. How is that possible? Sly Stone hasn't been inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. The Songwriters Hall of Fame. Yes, Sly and the Family Stone are in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But Sly Stone as a composer, not in the Songwriters Hall of Fame? How is that possible? So, Amari Purple Talk will campaign. I know I'm just a guy with a little podcast, but it's got to start somewhere. Like I said, this show is not afraid to be a platform in any way, shape, or form. So definitely we need to get the time into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. We need to get the revolution into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So definitely check it out. Badger their website, badger their Twitter page. Let's get a campaign going and let's get those groups in there. Because I think both, as far as Prince history, they're both significant and both reflect his musical worldview. It's example of definitely reaching back into the community. He didn't have to put his best friend Morris Day on the spotlight like that. He didn't have to even listen to Morris's suggestion to say, hey, I want Flight Time. Your biggest competitors our biggest competitors in high school, to be the backup band. He could have let them wallow in obscurity. But he reached back. Des Dickerson, went and auditioned back in the day during the Soft and Wet era, to be in the band. Andre Simone started off as, with his best friend, but then when Andre left, then it was Brown Mark. So, yeah. And like I said, it reflects both worldviews. It's a pro-black stance with the time. Like I said, absolutely, to me, as far as the 80s, probably the best R&B funk band of that time period. And there's an argument for Cameo. I was digging some Cameo records around the same time, but the time just did it for me. I saw Zapp Roger and Zapp before I saw The Time. And that band put on a show back in the day. You know, it was them and the Gap Band. And to me, Zapp stole the show. But again, you know, I went more for The Time. There was a period where I was into the Time records more than I was into the Prince records. And again, with the Revolution, that's the flip side of Prince's worldview, where it's all inclusive. You know, there is love for one another, and we all can work together. And it's not about what you look like, or, you know, if you're boy or girl, whatever. You know, it's just y'all working together. So I think, like I said, as a symbolic meaning, the induction would be very important. And what's most important before all of this, and like I said, it's not getting them in just on that stance alone. They have the talent to back it up too. So more so, they're just as deserving as any other band that's in there. They're more deserving than any other, as well as any other artist that's in there or have yet to be inducted. So I don't know, let's get them in there. But what's most important is, what do you think? You know, leave me a comment and let me know your thoughts. And from there, we're going to move on to our next topic. And that is going to be about the Batman. So this weekend was the 31st anniversary of the release of the 1989 Batman film and the soundtrack by Prince. So whenever I've only done this topic once, early on in Amari Purple Talk. And that was basically really just talking about the soundtrack a little bit, and really trying to get to the heart of if Prince was a comic book sweaty. Because there was an interview that Miles Marshall Lewis did with Jill Jones that confirmed that his whole fascination with the name Elektra had come from the Frank Miller era run on Daredevil comic books, because Elektra was this she was this assassin. Her and Daredevil were college sweethearts, and you know, like I said, the tension with him being a superhero, her being an assassin, it was sort of like Marvel's version of Batman and Catwoman almost, but at that time much cooler. So, you know, that was sort of the question that was put forth. And, you know, so, but anyway, but this time around, because it was the anniversary, you know, it was just kind of like, and then I watched the movie again the previous night. And, you know, it was just like, to me, it still holds up as a film. It does kind of, you know, well, let me give a little backstory. Somewhere around 86, 87, you know, group of us, you know, we're comic book sweaties. And, you know, every now and then, in addition to talking about music or whatever, or just movies in general, you know, we would just kind of like fan cast, because there weren't a lot of superhero movies back then. You know, we had Superman 1, 2, and 3, and depending on when we had this conversation, maybe 4 was out or about to come out or whatever. And Superman 4 is a movie I still want my money back for. But anyway, so you only had that, and you had the Star Wars films, which had all been released, and we thought that was it. We weren't going to get any more Star Wars movies at that time. And there really wasn't else. There were rumors that, you know, oh, there's going to be a Spider-Man movie. And then there were rumors as far back as 1981 that there was going to be a Batman movie. And in regards to Batman, it was definitely going to get as far away from the TV show as it could possibly get. So somehow, like I said, during comic book discussion, this idea, and a good friend of ours, John Rochester, rest in peace, bro. He kind of predicted the 1989 Batman movie. Because we were sitting around and, first we were, like, who should play Batman? And we were thinking like, yeah, Harrison Ford should be Batman. And then we're like, well, who would be Robin? Well, let's think about it. It could work. He's a little old, but Michael J. Fox could be Robin. We were just thinking. And then the big no-brainer, of course, for the Joker was Jack Nicholson. That was the big no-brainer. So during all of this, John is like, well, cool. Now, this is what it really needs to be. First, it needs to get as far away from the TV show as possible. None of that biff, bam, pow, which was cool when we were like grade school, like second grade. I remember like we would get out of school at 2:55. Batman would be on at 3 o'clock and just flying home to catch it, just get home just in time, for the theme song to come on and, just get ready and just watch Batman. So, it was cool for then, but as you kind of got older, you kind of really saw the campiness, or you kind of realized the campiness of it. And reading the comic books at that time in the 70s, it was a real serious effort to move that away from the TV show. So the comics in the early 70s were just cooler than the TV show. He had the long pointed ears and the real long cape. Wasn't a lot of Robin in it. Like they kind of wrote him out in some of it where he was off to college and then he'd show up every several issues or so, or even just make a guest appearance every once in a while or once a year or something like that, or he'd be off with the Titans or something like that. But anyway, he said we should get as far away from the TV show as possible and let the no spandex or underwear on the outside, uniform, whatever. And now for the comics, back in the day, and especially, I think this started with World War II or something, but basically, they eliminated, if you were drawing something, and say like you had a cape that was black, instead of using all black ink for it, I don't know if it was a shortage because of the war effort or something, but they would substitute the color blue. And you were just supposed to take it on its word that that's black. It's really black, but, they would have these like blue highlights. It would be all blue. Well, as the years go on, it was just maybe some people just thought it was blue. Say Batman's cape was blue, and a lot of times it looked powder blue. And it's like, well, if you're going to be a grim figure of vengeance, you're not going to scare anybody wearing a gray costume with a powder blue cape and cowl, and come out of the shadows and fight crime and beat up on criminals. It didn't work, So basically, John came up with this premise. It's like, okay, the costume should be all black. And it should be serious and dark and get away from the TV show. And yeah, Jack Nicholson's the Joker. And Prince should do the soundtrack. And we were like, yeah, that would be cool. Yeah, and that was the movie we wanted to see. So fast forward to around the late 1988 or early part of 89 or so. But anyway, the news leaks that, of course, there is going to be a Batman movie. Jack Nicholson is going to be the Joker. But Michael Keaton was going to be Batman. Now, you guys have to, for those of you that weren't around in 1989, this idea, when it was first put forth, because there had been no trailer yet. So keep in mind, no trailer had been released yet. And all the papers and the magazines and Entertainment Tonight or whatever, Michael Keaton is going to be Batman. And we all went, the Mr. Mom guy? That dude, the dude that was in Night Shift? The Beetlejuice? Batman? No! We thought this was going to end up being worse than the TV show at this point. So, now, just prior to the trailer, there was this movie called Clean and Sober. Now, I've never seen the movie, even to this day. But I do remember the trailer, and it's a very serious film. Michael Keaton's the star. He's playing an alcoholic in the movie. And so I remember seeing that trailer, and it's like, okay, well, looks like he can do drama. You know, he can handle dramatic parts. So if this is still going to be a serious movie, or if it's going to lean away from the TV show, then it looks like he does have the chops to pull it off. But, you know, we were still skeptical. Like, you know, okay, it's like, well, maybe he can pull it off. We don't know. But when that first trailer dropped, and when he goes, I'm Batman, and we're like, okay, he's Batman. We want to go. Yeah, we were going to. And long story short, the world turned up to see this. This was the Avengers Endgame of its day. You know, this was the biggest movie of 1989, and it worked. And also, too, like I said, the suit was black. Jack Nicholson was the Joker. Prince was doing the soundtrack. John was right. He was right. He called it. And, you know, if you have the Blu-ray to it, if you look at the special features, there's footage. You won't, of course, there's no interviews with Prince, you know, discussing, you know, oh, this is how I came up with Vicky Waiting for that scene in that movie or whatever, or this inspired me to do blah, blah, blah. Or I came up with Bat Dance, you know, because I wanted to literally beat the Bat Dance from the TV show. But, you know, you got none of that. But there is you see him for like a few seconds. And they do kind of mention him in one of the special feature documentaries on the filming. And you see him on the set talking to Tim Burton and stuff. You know, it's just kind of like a faraway shot. You know, nothing direct, and nobody's talking to the camera. It's just them kind of capture this meeting and them discussing the film or whatever, or Tim Burton showing him the set and stuff. So that, where you've read in books and other magazine articles about when he flew out to watch the filming of it, and he saw a couple of scenes, watched some of the dailies, got inspired, locked himself into Paisley Park for, I forget, 2 weeks or something? For 2 weeks, and, you know, cranks out the songs for the soundtrack. Now, you know, this was at a point when, you know, the Love Sexy tour was over. And, you know, that has a special meaning for a lot of people. But you really have to realize that the album was technically a flop. I mean, you know, 500,000 copies, it still went gold, but you're talking about a multi-platinum artist. You know, even his worst selling album at that point was like 2 million or something. You know, Parade was like 2 million, or Sign of the Times, I forget how many millions, but that was like a $2 or at least $4 million. I don't even think it made that much. I think it was a 2 million seller as well. But, you know, to go from averaging, you know, 1.5 million copies per album post Purple Rain to just 500,000 copies and struggling to fill up stadiums, with the Love Sexy tour. No matter, like I said, I know for me at that time, I enjoyed Love Sexy. I mean, I liked the Black Album better at that time. Since about 94, Love Sexy has been sort of my go-to album. It was kind of a therapy record for me at one point. So when they talk about, or when Prince talks about, and I remember reading this before the fact, that, he's read, well, Love Sexy didn't do that well. But I encounter people that say Love Sexy saved my life. Now, basically, it wasn't that drastic for me, but still, I look at it, it's a great album, and I kind of cap off his classic period there. As much as I love the Batman album, I still kind of cap off 88. 78 to 88 is the classic period. 89, 90 is sort of a transitional period. Then we kind of get into a New Power Generation era and so on. But that being said, Warner Brothers was like, dude, we don't need another album from you. Go take a year off, recharge your batteries, that kind of thing. Now, he was working on kind of loosely Rave Into the Joy Fantastic, kind of putting that album together. And then I think it kind of transitioned into an idea of doing Graffiti Bridge as an album. I don't even think it was a movie yet. Or he was still working on the movie. Or I don't know. There's people that know this better than I do. So definitely check out the other podcasts or Prince Vault, Housequake, in those places. They'll have the information on it. But the idea to do the Batman movie kind of came mostly from Jack Nicholson, really. They were, when you film a movie and you don't have the original compositions yet, then you kind of just put in whatever. So especially like if you remember the scene in the art museum, and especially the Gotham City celebration too, where Tim Burton originally had dropped in like 1999 and Baby I'm a Star, so Jack Nicholson can have something to dance to for it. And Jack Nicholson was a Prince fan, and he was just like, Tim, I think you need to have Prince do the soundtrack. And I guess Tim Burton was like, okay, yeah. So they made contact with Prince, and Prince flew out to London where they were filming the movie. And like I said, where you read in the books and the magazine articles about that particular visit to the set, where he watched a couple of the key scenes being filmed and watched some of the dailies being played back. The official story goes, I hear music in these scenes. And, he flies back to Paisley Park and, back to Minneapolis. There you go. So, and the rest is Bat history. Now, I cap off, like I said, the classic period for Prince at Love Sexy. Like I said, from 78 to 88, that's sort of the classic period. And to me, Batman and Graffiti Bridge was sort of a transition. So, I get I see a lot of people that really just hate the Batman album, or not necessarily hate it. They don't acknowledge it as like one of the best or their favorite. Some people don't like Bat Dance. How can you not like Bat Dance? I mean, I was hyped when I first heard it, because it's like Prince doing the music for a Batman film, and we know early on that the Batman TV show theme was the very first thing he learned to play on piano. So you put all this symmetry together, and it just, it makes sense. But like I said, at that time, I mean, you're coming off of When Doves Cry. You're coming off a Sign of the Times. And I mean, Alphabet Street was a pretty good single and stuff. So I mean, just there's that genius factor. Like I said, there's Purple Rain, there's, Around the World in a Day, just the audacity to do that. And, stuff like She's Always in My Hair for the B-sides. The Parade album. So, especially Purple Rain and Parade. And then you've got the genius level of Sign of the Times, that whole album, that you still couldn't imagine what a Prince Batman soundtrack would sound like. And I guess maybe that was the thing. Maybe the expectation bar was raised a little too high just based on the previous track record. You just knew that this was going to be an event. And to me, it was. I really enjoyed Bat Dance. I mean, from the moment it dropped. Now, I mean, my thing was like, where is this going to fit in the movie? But the beauty of it is, and the genius of it, that though it was the first single and it dropped prior to the film coming out, the use of the samples, and I don't think I've heard anybody do this since. It's very clever, Mark, because everything's visual. Of course, there's always been the music video. If you're doing a soundtrack, the lead-off song, it's the whatever, whether it's the theme song or a single you pull off the soundtrack, and it has just a bunch of clips of the film in it. This was clever because the single itself was just as impactful to me as the trailer. And it worked just, I mean, as clever marketing for the film. I remember seeing where you just saw just the bat symbol everywhere. And I mean, it was everywhere. And then you come out with the single and the music video, no clips of the movie. It was just a conceptual video, no different than any other music video. And just the use of the samples sold the film. It really gave me an idea of what I was going to see, and raised my anticipation level. I mean, the trailer already did its job, and it was impactful. Like I said, the minute you got the "I'm Batman," it worked. It just worked. And to me, that single did it. I mean, that works. After a while, I know when the 12-inch single came out and there was just the Vicky Vale mix, I mean, that overall was really my favorite part of it. But I love overall the original album version of it, because it just captures, again, everybody. It ends on a very funky note with the whole Vicky Vale part, but the rock guitar, and I mean, he was shredding, and that shredding stood up to what anybody was doing at that time. So it kind of captured that crowd. It captured the rock crowd that was hyped to see this movie, whether it was kids that only listened to, say, Motley Crue or Guns N' Roses. That little heavy guitar, that captured that side of it. Then you had the heavy funk with the samples in there too, and that got us hyped to go see it. Like, that was just amazing. To me, that was the genius of it. I don't know if that was just Prince, or he handed that to Warner Brothers and they said, this can work. So, I mean, just that collaboration on the marketing level, to me, was just absolute genius. But yeah, when I got the actual album, and I mean, it opens with The Future. And I mean, that song really, to me, stands up today, if you look at what we're facing today, you know, the line systematic overthrow of the underclass. Hollywood conjures images of the past. New world needs spirituality that will last. I've seen the future, and it will be. And you mean to tell me this cat is not in the Songwriters Hall of Fame? You know, that's some H.G. Wells, George Orwell level, Jules Verne predicting the future. I mean, this is right, you know, even leading up to, you know, even back then, leading up to Rodney King. But, you know, you fast forward 31 years later and look at where we are. And again, you know, systematic overthrow of the underclass. You know, the world, because we're the disenfranchised. Like I said, we're the culture that didn't have the luxury to en masse come here voluntarily. You know, Africa itself, it's a continent. There were countries in Western and Northern Africa to where millions were brought en masse. And if you're bringing a collective of people against their will, you know, there had to be a plan in place to keep those masses from effectively communicating one another, to basically kick everyone's ass and turn those boats around and go back home. Systematic overthrow of the underclass is why we're still having this discussion today. Like I said, we're the only ones that came here involuntarily. Human beings, Italians, Jews, Chinese that came voluntarily, you know, Latin brothers and sisters that, although they were colonizers at one point, were systematically, you know, removed from ownership of California and Texas. Any system to where, you know, even as far, you know, as recent as Occupy Wall Street, you know, there's a reason today, right now, that the planet itself, of people that just want to feed their families, that just want to feel like they're being treated fairly, to where the promises of freedom and democracy, and also to just to love one another. There's a reason why, as a collective of people, and the Black Lives Matter is the flashpoint, why the world is saying, look, you know, we're tired of just a few people running things. And they're running things out of fear of losing a power that in the cosmic scheme of things really does not exist. So, I mean, that song in itself, the future in it right there, you know, Yellow Smiley offers me X like he's drinking 7-Up. I would rather drink 6 razor blades from a paper cup. You know, that's ironic in itself, because I mean, you know, Prince didn't set out to die. You know, that was not his intention. But the use of, you know, man-made drugs are still a problem for the users, and it's created this element for the sellers, and that's, both your pharmaceutical companies as well as your street level distributors. New World needs spirituality that will last, which means we need to love ourselves so where we're not dependent on drugs or changing our look so radically, or whatever addiction, whether it's addiction to people, whether it's an addiction to substances, addictions in general. That song is very, that's a powerful song. Like I said, it stands up to anything in Prince's classic period, and it stands up to anything great that he's done since. And that's just the lead off track. Electric Chair is my favorite. That was one, like I said, The Future was sort of the 1-2 punch for me. And that's what I always look for in a great Prince record. If you kind of give me that 1-2 punch and then that second 1-2 punch with the next couple of songs. Now, here it's not so effective. To me, the Arms of Orion, it's something that I've grown to appreciate over the years. But it's like after The Future, Electric Chair, there's sort of this come down, which on the one hand makes sense, but would have been better sense if it was a different ballad. But like I said, I've never really skipped tracks. I always play this from beginning to end anyway. But The Arms of Orion, it's a pretty, like I said, it's grown on me over the years. To me, it's still not the greatest Prince ballad. But the parts for me where it works with Prince and Sheena Easton, where it works for me, it works. And then Party Man, as we know, is either a song intended for the time that's a lost classic, but the official story is that I guess maybe this was during the set visit, and he says the way that Jack Nicholson sat down, kind of put his feet up on the desk or whatever, the swag kind of reminded him of Morris Day. So I guess not necessarily writing that on the spot, but that was one. It was like, hey, pull Party Man out of the vault. Let me finish it up. So one of my favorite things to look at is it was a snippet from this proposed Prince documentary by Albert McNolly. And some of the footage that was used, it was him recording the bass line to Party Man. And I already love the song. I love the video. I love the live versions of it. Hands down, one of my favorite tracks on this album. But watching him record that bass line, it's probably one of the most amazing musical moments. Just those few seconds alone stands up to any of the best musical performances I've seen by anybody, including him. It stands up. Just those few seconds alone. That's genius right there. Vicky Waiting, again, favorite song. And again, why isn't he in the Songwriters Hall of Fame? Dig that Vicky Waiting. You get the little sort of, the thing about the cathedral and all that. That's funny. But to me, the selling point of that song, I love the groove. To me, it's like if Forever in My Life and the Ballad of Dorothy Parker and a Stevie Wonder song got mixed in a blender together and came out as Vicky Waiting. But the line, again, why is this cat not in the Songwriters Hall of Fame? Talk of children still frightens me. Is my character enough to be one that deserves a copy made? This one day I hope to see. And here I am. Let's see. So this is 89. So I'm like 23 at the time hearing this. And yeah, that's a lyric that, really registered with me. That line right there. Now for me, I got to see, and as I'm recording this, well, now it's the next morning, but as I started, we were at the tail end of Father's Day. So, yes, I've got to see my copies made, and, one day I hope to see, and I did see, and it's been amazing, folks. Definitely amazing. Yeah, Trust to me was more like a sort of a spiritual son of Baby I'm a Star to me. I have a friend that, like, this is his track. This is his, maybe not his favorite track on the soundtrack, but definitely, he's more over the moon for it than I am. But, it's not a bad song. And I mean, it works in the context of the film. Money, money, money. Who do you trust? Hubba, hubba, hubba. I'm giving away free money. And where is the Batman? He's at home, washing his tights. So, I mean, I get it. It works in the context of the film like that. But, I mean, again, like I say, I don't really skip the songs when I play this. I play this from beginning to end. And it's a pretty good track to me. Like I said, it's a spiritual son of Baby I'm a Star to me. But it works to me. Let's see. Lemon Crush to me was, I don't know. To me, this was like Prince trying to do New Jack Swing. This was sort of like the first attempt to like jump on that bandwagon. Because to me, I love, was that Groove Me by Guy. I love that song. I love the album too of that. And, New Jack Swing had taken over by this point. It was that, it was Keith Sweat's I Wanna, those songs with 2 years prior, those were sort of the ones that kicked open the door, and New Jack Swing started running right through. Then by 89, you had Teddy Riley, and you had him, Heavy D and the Boys. If you look at his track record of not just the stuff with Guy, but the stuff that he's produced, he was firing all cylinders the way that Jam and Lewis were, and LA and Babyface. But Teddy was the one that sort of revolutionized the genre, the blending of hip hop with R&B. I know it's something I always wanted to try to do, but I could never pull it off. But I guess, that energy, it hits the planet, and some people are able to execute it better than others. And definitely, that was one cat that definitely executed it better than any way that I could have ever imagined for it. But, man, that was the sound. And this was, I guess, sort of that first kind of, okay, Prince trying to follow the trend or kind of compete with the trend. We've never really seen that from him. We've seen him influenced by things, obviously. But, usually it was stuff that had come way before, definite legends, where it's, okay, we know, okay, that Housequake, that's James Brown. He's doing James Brown, but he made it his own. There's times when we know he was channeling Sly and the Family Stone, or he was channeling Larry Graham or Rufus, or, whatever, but it was always put into this blender and came out like this total original thing. Where Lemon Crush, like I said, it was that kind of first sign of him maybe more so following the trend. I enjoyed it. I don't know, maybe to me, if it was a minute shorter or something, I don't know. But again, like I said, I don't skip on this album. I just, I ride the songs out all the way through. And there's little nuances in the song that I enjoy. I like the attempt. To me, it really doesn't really go anywhere. But I think once I found out the inspiration for this song, then I kind of listen with a little more interest to it when I do play it. And this song was a result of where Prince was dating Anna Fantastic at the time, And her sort of beverage of the moment was the lemon crush soda, and hence the song Lemon Crush. So, enjoyable for what it is. Of course, it doesn't appear in the movie anywhere at all. This is really just kind of like album filler, really. But, I mean, the album filler is probably better than a lot of people's worst attempts at a hit single, too. So, there's that. But then after that is Scandalous. And that's, to me, what I call, or started to call, the Adore class ballad. Now, Questlove thinks that Prince's best ballad is Do Me Baby, which rightfully so. It's a damn good ballad. And with its rawness and immediacy, yeah, it's hard to top that. But if you're looking at the maturity of songwriting, Adore was the one where the critics was kind of saying the songwriting, the lyrics were a lot more mature than just the obvious, with that. So, yeah. And I think to me, Scandalous to me is that sort of close second to Adore. Because, Adore, it's probably one of my favorite Prince ballads. And like I said, just based on the level of maturity from the arrangement, because it's a nod to the Luther Vandross records, and it's a nod to the Patti LaBelle ballads of that time period, and it stands up, and a lot of times it even, to me, in some cases exceeds both of those. But it definitely stands up to what Luther was doing. It stands up to Patti's If Only You Knew. It stands up to that. And and especially if you get the Scandalous, the Sex Suite, the I guess you can't, the 12-inch single. I know I got the CD single of it where it's broken up into 3 parts, and you got Kim Basinger on it and everything. And to me, that just it elevates it even more. It's like it's hard to really listen to it after you've heard the parts 1, 2, and 3 on the Scandalous Sex Suite version. It's even weirder when you watch the movie and you watching the credits and the Scandalous is playing, how it kind of like goes through sort of like the first verse and then just kind of leaps into the chorus, and then it just Scandalous, and it just kind of just ends. So it's even weirder then, and it just makes you want to just, okay, darn it, I'm just going to put on the CD because I want to hear the song from beginning to end in its entirety. Then you hear that and you realize, oh, I got to go hear the Scandalous Sex Suite now because I want to hear all 15 minutes of the song. But yeah, one of his best ballads with that. And like I said, for me, it's a very close second to Adore. With that. And of course, Bat Dance, which we've discussed before. Like I said, great marketing for the movie, great marketing for the soundtrack, genius, the way that was put together, which I think a lot of people don't really appreciate. Like I said, there's that high expectation from all the classic material. And I think people have kind of missed out on what this album was supposed to do, which was be a good accompaniment to the film. Now, in hindsight, I've read some things where Tim Burton felt that he should have utilized the Prince music more, and that it was the Warner Brothers studio that interfered. And then I've read some things where Tim Burton said that the Prince music was a bit much in it, and that's why it's kind of regulated to just Party Man and Trust. Scandalous stuck there at the end. Although the scene in the Batcave with when Alfred brings Vicky Vale into the Batcave, which, if I was back, that would have been Alfred's last day of employment. Danny Elfman's score for the film, it uses an element of Scandalous in there, which I thought was a really good stroke right there. Maybe it could have been emphasized a little bit more, but I thought that worked. Or, I don't know, like I said, you're dealing with, I forget how much that movie, the budget was on that. I think it was $100 million for the budget on that film. But, when you're dealing with that amount of money, you're going to get some studio interference. Luckily, the studio interference didn't take away from the film in this particular case. It didn't ruin the film in any case, but I don't know. Like I said, I think depending on what you read and when or when that interview was done, but I do think that Tim Burton said with hindsight, he could have utilized more of the Prince music in it. I know the beginning of the film, where the future's being played, to me, that should have been more, if nothing else, that should have been more prominent. I know Electric Chair and Vicky Waiting were kind of regulated to being instrumentals in there. I don't know. I think it would have been okay to put some vocal versions in there, or slip the vocals in, even if it's kind of buried. Well, I don't know. Maybe that would have detracted from some of the speaking parts in there. But there was a lot of non-verbal stuff going on while both of those songs were being played. So they could have slipped in some vocals strategically, and it still would have, flowed well with that scene, or fit that scene, and flowed well with the film as well. But other than that, I mean, it's still an enjoyable film to watch. Even to this day, there's a lot of lines in that film which are perfect inside jokes for my very essentially non-essential gig. And if you shipped 1 million of those things yet, ship them all. We're going out a whole new door. Well, we've been ratted out here, boys. And, again, too, like I said, I love the soundtrack. I practically bumped this thing the entire summer of '89. There was a period, I was kind of back and forth between California and here. When I was here, then I would work nights. And, kind of during lunch, whatever, because I would have my Walkman with me, and then during lunch, whatever the cassette of the moment. But 9 times out of 10, it was the Batman soundtrack that I would have with me, and that was sort of my summer of '89, folks. So, yeah, like I said, to me, it stands up. Like I said, it's, people want to debate if that's where there and Graffiti Bridge Inn is the classic era. Again, like I said, for me, the classic era ends with Lovesexy, and this was more of a transition because, again, the original plan was to take just a year off, and we were either going to get Graffiti Bridge, I don't know if it was just going to be just an album at that point, or if we were getting Rave Into the Joy Fantastic, or if he was working on that and Warner Brothers said, no, we don't want an album from you. Then he just said, sod it, I'm going to just do Graffiti Bridge. And then the call for Batman came, or whatever. But with those type of dynamics, the success of the Batman album, because that became a 6 million selling album, I think, worldwide or something. But that sort of led to the doors being open for Graffiti Bridge to come about as a film, even though we might do a show on that one at some point, but the budget probably wasn't there like it should have been, but at least it did kind of give Warner Brothers a little bit of confidence to say go ahead with that particular project a bit. But I think that's the thing where a lot of people debate on whether it's a classic album or not. It's very significant in Prince history because it was attached to the biggest film of 1989, and that was a film that really started to crack open the door for the whole superhero movie genre. You know, you've got the Superman 1 and 2, and then you have the 1989 Batman. Batman Returns was a little divisive, but that's one that I enjoy also. But, you know, of course, Batman Forever was sort of the beginning of the end, and Batman and Robin sort of ruined the superhero movie genre for a while until a little movie called Blade came out. And granted, a couple of years after that, you got the X-Men and Spider-Man, but folks, it was Blade that saved the superhero genre and kicked open the door so you could get an X-Men and you could get that first Spider-Man film in there too, to do what it did to elevate the game. So yeah, and of course, as far as Batman, we did get the Chris Nolan films with Christian Bale as Batman, where to me, Michael Keaton was a great Batman, and only recently I got to appreciate what they were trying to do with Bruce Wayne in that. But as far as what we've come to expect Bruce Wayne to be, to me, Michael Keaton didn't exemplify that. But in context of the character, I get what they were trying to do, and it does work. It does work. So there's that. And then Val Kilmer was a cool Batman, a cool Bruce Wayne. George Clooney was a disappointment to me. That was a big letdown because I thought he could pull it off, but ended up really not. And then, like I said, you get Christian Bale, who's great Batman, great Bruce Wayne.
But the voice, I don't know, it sounds like he has a cold all the time. It's not who I am underneath, it's what I do.
Anyway, yeah. But I'm looking forward, and then Ben Affleck, again, there's a lot of people for, a lot of people against, but so far, the actual comic book Batman Bruce Wayne, Ben Affleck actually absolutely knocked that out of the park for sure. And Adam West, hey, that'll still be the boy to this day. The TV show, like I said, used to run home second grade, check it out. And, I kind of go back and check it out every now and then too. And, it's cool for what it was. It was the Vietnam era, and the networks, they didn't want to do anything too serious. Footnote, Lyle Wagner was originally tapped to be Batman, and when he was tapped to do it, it was going to be a little bit more serious. It was going to be a serious kind of, maybe like a crime drama type thing. But when they decided to go for the camp aspect of it, and they got Adam West in, and he brought what he brought to the role, they decided to just roll with that and keep it going. And just keep it going. So it did what it did. It became a phenomenon. They call it part of the 3 Bs: Bond, Beatles, and Batman. There's your 60s right there in a nutshell. But again, big soft spot for the 1989 Batman. Like I said, peace to John Rochester for predicting that. We miss you. And this segment's dedicated to you, and it's also dedicated to someone I've never met, but I used to watch his show, And also, too, when he was a guest on, back in the day, AMC Movie Talk, and then Collider Movie Talk, AMC Heroes, he was the host, Collider Heroes, and one of my inspirations for actually doing a podcast, and that's John Schnepp, King of the Sweaties. You know, his comic book knowledge was vast and always on the one. So this segment is dedicated to him as well. So from that, we're going to move on to our Purple Spotlight. And this time we're going to switch up the Purple Spotlight. And instead of just focusing on Prince proteges or associated acts, albums, we're going to expand it to events, whether they are, or events, or any item that's significant, whether it was a direct influence on Prince or an indirect influence on Prince, or even if it's something that reflected kind of his worldview, or it kind of echoes his worldview. You know, because none of us were really actually inside of his head, but if there were things that he was passionate about that he tried to put forth, this will be just kind of me and my either interpretation of that or an extension of that, or wherever it may lead. But we're going to start off this week, and we're going to talk about James Brown, who definitely was a huge influence on Prince. In fact, as a youngster, his dad took him to see James Brown, got to put him up on stage and got to dance around a little bit. Prince enjoyed the dancing girls on the stage and was like, this is what I want to do. And by God, did he do it. But we're going to focus on James Brown and Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud, how it's still relevant and still needed to this day. You know, we talked about The Future by Prince with the whole systematic overthrow of the underclass. Hollywood conjures images of the past. We covered that earlier. But you have to walk back to a time. And for a lot of people that want to classify this as ancient history, or if it's a generational thing and you weren't around during that time period and it feels like ancient history to you, 50 years ago, in the grand scheme of this planet, is not ancient history. And we still deal with the ripple effect of things that have happened centuries ago. And again, you know, there's a lot of listeners of Amari Purple Talk that are from all over the world, to where you can pinpoint your culture to its very inception. And your history doesn't stop with your grandparents or your great-grandparents. You know, it may be your frame of reference, but you've been instilled, or you've been blessed to have been instilled with a knowledge base of your culture from its inception. So whatever customs or rituals that you participate in, and how you celebrate that culture and the pride that you take within that culture, can be a beautiful thing. And if there were points in your history where you've dealt with adversity, and again, you may not have been in direct effect of that adversity, again, it may have stopped with a parent or a grandparent or a great grandparent, or you were instilled with that knowledge that at one point, this is where the culture faced a moment of adversity, and this is what we had to do as a culture to overcome it. When you're part of a culture whose ancestry was brought here involuntarily, and again, slavery is wrong all across the board. The thing about the transatlantic slave trade is the ruthlessness that ensued, the genocide that ensued, the inhumanity that ensued because it was a economic cash cow. It was $1 billion industry that, to justify benefiting from all those millions, you had to regulate millions of people from different countries in Western and Northern Africa to systematically divide and conquer, so that we don't get on the same page and out of your fear think that that coming together will ensue in your own enslavement or payback or retribution. That ripple effect from that mindset in the execution of that systemic racism that's born out of fear. Here we are in the 21st century, and the planet as a whole, as it comes to, again, people across the board that are on the same level as far as we're being a middle class or lower class people, tired of just a handful of people that are holding on to this illusion of power and frightened over absolutely nothing, really. There's no crime in getting along. There's no crime in being one big happy planet. You know, people are going to disagree, and we have a right to disagree. But like I said, I'm saying all this to say that if you're Italian, you identify as an Italian, whether you were born in America or born in Italy or whatever. If that's your heritage, that's your heritage. If you're Japanese, whether you were born in America or born in Japan, it's your heritage, it's your culture. And you can pinpoint it. But descendants of slaves that are living in America, and at least the way the immigration laws of 1923 put it, if you are born on American soil, you are therefore an American. However, if your descendants were brought here involuntarily since 1619 all the way up until 1863, then there's not an easy identifiable way to attach a heritage, because your school books, your history books will have you believe that black people's history started with slavery, and that is simply not the truth. There are literally hundreds of thousands of years of evidence that indigenous people across the planet, mainly in Africa, have created an advanced civilization long before any Indo-European, and that in its wake everything has come through Indo-European. It has come through by deceit, treachery, and just flat out genocide. Now, that being said, again, of course, in school, these people are painted as heroes. And as the cliche goes, history is written by the victors. Well, here we are in the 21st century. And I guess, again, if you're science fiction, which becomes precursor to science fact, meaning that everything that has come to pass, whether it's through H.G. Wells, George Orwell, or Jules Verne, then the next logical step should and ought to be the works of one Gene Roddenberry. And that in order to get to the utopia that you see on board the Starship Enterprise, if you know your Star Trek, that utopia came about at a very heavy price to humanity. And that these are the sort of winds of change. So I know I'm kind of going around the city and through the country to talk about a James Brown record. But all of that to say that we don't have an identifiable name. We're called one name that, as far as my research, has no discernible origin whatsoever, unless it was a bunch of idiots that decided they wanted to mispronounce the Spanish word for negros. I'll let you guys do the math from there. But that particular word has so much bloodshed attached to it. And again, the propaganda to justify one superiority over another, the programming in which it took to where people within that same culture can call one another that as a term of endearment, is a very deadly side effect to that poison. So it goes from that to being Negro, to colored. But then here comes James Brown, the hardest working man in show business, Mr. Dynamite. While the British invasion musically was taking place and Motown was doing its best to be competitive, and it was competitive, James didn't try to cross over. He had the people cross over to him, and he was enjoying much success. And it was only after the assassination of Martin Luther King, where riots were breaking out in various cities across the United States, that James Brown, he was scheduled to do a concert in Boston. And the idea, according to the city of Boston, the idea was to cancel the concert. But the idea was put forth to go ahead and continue the concert. And not only did they decide to continue with the concert, they also decided to televise it. Because this way, by broadcasting it the idea was that folks would stay home and not go out and protest or riot. And it worked. If you seek out, you can probably get it on Amazon. If you go on YouTube, on James Brown's YouTube channel, there's a documentary, The Night James Brown Saved Boston. Like I said, you can also buy it too. There's also you can buy it separately or as a 3-pack, but it's The Night James Brown Saved Boston. There's also a DVD of the concert in its entirety. And then there's another DVD of a similar concert in Harlem. And I think it was, I don't know, it's part of a TV special that was like done right after the Boston thing or before it, I think. But it's the concert, and, it's kind of James Brown also going around and, just walking amongst the hood and talking to brothers and sisters and, just trying to get a feel of what's going on and what people can do to fix it. So you have that, and then you have where Washington, D.C., after the success of the Boston concert, you have Washington, D.C. that's now saying, hey, get James Brown down here so he can perform and, maybe things can quiet down. And yeah, that was successful. But then too, you also had some detractors, some within the Panthers saying that James Brown had kind of sold out a little bit. And James Brown was his own person. There's a lot of things he did that was very controversial, or things that he did that he thought was right, or that he felt could help lend a voice. But to the masses, it was kind of like it was a sellout move. But it still got to him that he was getting that type of criticism. And so all of this going on within this short time period, and I think even with a quick trip to Vietnam, seeing the brothers over there fighting in the U.S. military and still not getting any respect here in the U.S. as a people. These were the dynamics that created the record Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud. And what this record did was literally overnight erase the one N-word, Negro, colored. It erased those from the vocabulary. And as a collective, it didn't matter what, your economic situation was, didn't matter where you were in the United States. The majority of us accepted that and decided, okay, this is what we're going to be called, until somebody decided, hey, let's call ourselves African Americans, and let that stick right there. But that was the beauty and the power of that record, to capture a collective. And within just those few minutes of a song, a glimmer of something, a glimmer of hope, a glimmer of, some type of, a powerful energy. You had, like I said, Curtis Mayfield, that was very socially conscious, did some very powerful stuff. Moving On Up, Choice of Colors, later We People Who Are Darker Than Blue, very later on, If There's a Hell Below. But, Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud, it had a beat, and you could dance to it, and you can raise your fist to it all at the same time. And, as a kid, it was almost like required listening, because that was the thing, it's like 4, 5, 6 years old. I know I was like 2 when the record came out, but I know years later, as I'm, 5, 6, and I've got like aunts, uncles, they're like, sing that song, sing it, say it loud. You're like, yeah, it gave you something, and like I said, if any of you read the Prince portion of the Beautiful Ones, the introduction. I've been planning to do a segment to discuss that more in depth, but the introduction was sort of Prince's mission statement about freedom, ownership, and things of that nature. But those few pages really gave you a glimpse of what it was like to grow up black in the 70s, the 60s and the 70s, where, for me, definitely what, a lot of the stories he was telling, that was my experience too in the 70s, and even going into the 80s, even just going into high school, some things were relative then. But, it was definitely a record of that time. And there's a lot of hip hop in the 80s that sort of built on the foundation of I'm Black and I'm Proud. I mean, you got Public Enemy, there's KRS-One, there's Rakim, there's Paris, there's X-Clan, there's NWA, there's Tupac. We kind of had for a while those sort of voices that expanded on that and really, really started to give us some information, Fight the Power, and, they're straight out of Compton. That's, look, this is a reality of what's going on. And this is, the ripple effects of being disenfranchised when there's nowhere to go. There's no one to look up to, or this is all we have to look up to. And they got the money and the cars and the this and the that. And, we sorely need that today, because what Prince was even fighting for, because the music industry has always been trying to pigeonhole black artists. I mean, not just in terms of, I say in the case of Prince, where it's, okay, I'm a cat that loves all kind of music, and my brand is reflective of, yeah, I can do James Brown, but I can also do David Bowie too. I can do the Beatles. I can also do Led Zeppelin, but I can also play like Carlos Santana, but I can also do a ballad as good as, say, Blue Magic, but on the hip hop side of things, as hip hop was sort of finding its own Bob Dylans and its own Curtis Mayfields, and being a voice of revolution and positive change, and yeah, let's get off the streets, let's get off the drugs, let's stop selling, let's stop doing this, let's stop doing that, and let's elevate. The record companies were kind of pushing the other way, where it's like, well, we don't want to hear about you fighting the power. We want to hear more about these drugs, and and let's call these, let's have some more bitches and hoes get in there too. Let's do that. Let's have more of that. And we used to, as musicians, we used to hear these stories of white kids that, they played a Led Zeppelin record backwards, or they played a Black Sabbath record and committed suicide the next day. And we used to think it was so ridiculous that a record could program you to do that. That a record could make you do something so negative. like that. But now, and I remember the NPG Music Club. No, before then, when he had the Love for One Another website, and there was one thing that Prince posted about how programmed music can be hypnotic in that sense, where music is organic. And I mean, there's a certain frequencies you could tap into or whatever, and they can have a certain influence on you and that type of thing. But, when it's that repetitive, you got that repetitive beat. Yes, it's hypnotic. It's hypnotizing you. And then if the subject matter, there's no positive solution, if there's no positive outcome, if all you're hearing about is the body count, if there's no concept of true love, it's about conquest, sexual conquest, or it's about, how many women you can have, or how many cars you can have, or how much money, and there's no substance, there's no talk about elevating your community. It's all gimme, 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 mine, mine, mine. And that's all you hear day in, day out. And that's all the radio stations are playing. And that's all the record companies are selling. Then yeah, we were wrong in those days. Or we were right until they just figured out a way to do it. Yeah, but that type of song, that I'm Black and I'm Proud, it's needed today. And, I know this is overwhelming. A lot of people may not want to hear it, or people are tired of hearing it. But, it's hard for me to do a show and not address it, Or I've even seen people that are supposed Prince fans that just have such hate for people of color. And it's like I almost wanted to ask why, but I'm reminded of that scene in Do the Right Thing when it's like, hey, Sal, how come you ain't got no brothers on the wall, man? And it's like, the scene with John Turturro where it's like, okay, well, who's your favorite comedian? Oh, it's Eddie Murphy. Well, who's your favorite rock star? Springsteen. No, it ain't. It's Prince. Prince is your favorite. And he's like, yeah, but I don't look at Michael Jackson or Prince or Eddie Murphy as black. And if there are some of you out there that are listening to this show and that's how you think, let me tell you how wrong you really are. And you're wrong in the sense that you have been programmed to think, and this is born out of fear. So maybe that fear was programmed into you to where you discovered that type of thinking, or someone programmed that type of thinking into you. That your fear is totally unjustified, and it is a literal cancer. It is a literal disease that is literally eating away at you to where you will have no positive outcome in life. Now, I mean, that doesn't mean that you won't go on to have a good job or you won't have a family or anything like that. But what happens here on this plane of existence is your chance to figure all of this out. So when you do transition, now that's a whole wide open field, and whatever your spiritual beliefs are, you have a right to them. So, we won't get too heavily into that. But the bottom line is, let's look at it this way. Murder is the absolute interruption of one's divine purpose. We've all, regardless of what you believe, we've been given the gift of free will. which means you can choose to follow God's law or you could choose not to follow it. But if you choose not to follow it, then there's a whole set of consequences that come your way, and they are not good consequences. But that is to say that you don't know what a human being's trajectory is or what they are going to choose at any determined point in time. So you don't know if any one human being, young, old, whatever, will be the one to figure out how to cure cancer, or if that human being will be able to have the meaning of life in the universe and everything else, to where we can all get on the same page and be one big happy planet, or the one that can save the environment, or whatever, or just be able to make a difference if they have a musical talent or excel at whatever it is that they want to excel, or just live their best life. And genocide is the same thing, just on a grander scale. And, you can not like something, you can not like a particular individual, but you got to realize that whatever it is that you dislike, it's about them trying to figure out their own existence. It's not up to you to change it. It's not up to you to, force them to be something that they're not. They have to come to that realization on their own. That's what all 7 billion of us on the planet are trying to do, is figure out what, who or what we want to be. Simple as that. But when we're programmed, whether by environment, whether it's propaganda, whether it's a chosen few, that want to hold on to this illusion of something, that they're willing to commit murder and genocide to hold on to it. I, in my essentially non-essential essential gig, I was asked why something that was barely 50 cents, why that was so high of a price. My answer to that was, who determined how much a Rolls Royce should be? Who determined how much gold or diamonds are worth? And why was there so much genocide, necessary to have to, to warrant owning all of that or possessing all of that? Who determined that whatever natural resources were so valuable that they had to go to another country and slaughter millions of its, indigenous people that were more than willing to share, that you had to resort to deceit and treachery? And then your history books and your Hollywood movies, make this such a glamorous thing that it is your divine right to do so. These are the questions you have to ask yourself, is why. So when you see, people acting as judge, jury, and executioner, when there are supposedly civilized laws on the books. Now, granted, I know that the United States Constitution or the Declaration of Independence did not have slaves in mind when they drafted those documents. The Constitution was amended to include us, but somebody forgot to clue in a few certain individuals that are sort of holding the keys and guarding the doors, that these things have been amended to include us, because it's just the humane thing to do. So when you look at some people say we got a lot of malice, some say it's a lot of nerve, but I say we won't quit moving until we get what we deserve. It's not about supplanting you or turning the tables or placing you enslavement is like payback, like this is how I see how it feels. It's not about that. It's like we've been buked and we've been scorned, we've been treated bad, talked about as sure as you're born. But just as sure as it takes two eyes to make a pair, we can't quit until we get our share. And the thing is that once again, just like this song overnight erased every negative nom de plume that we've been given, we have to once again get on that same page with that same type of excitement, that same type of energy. So whenever atrocities like this happen, then there are those that can represent as a collective, or we as a collective can take it to whoever represents us as a collective, and they can go to whatever world leader, just like the Pope can go to whatever country and say, oh, you naughty boys, you shouldn't do that. And whether they listen or not, they have to take his phone call, if nothing else. You know, if an atrocity was committed with Japanese Americans during World War II, and a former U.S. occupied territory per terms of surrender can rise as an economic power and say, well, you know, our Japanese brothers and sisters that were interned, you need to pay them some type of reparation. You know, some of you sort of farm boys out there or whatever, this is a free country. Well, you have a right to say that, and we have a right to say the same. Simple as that. Because regardless of what your heritage is, as a collective, things are either reduced to an individual level. So if someone within that collective commits an atrocity that's just so outlandish, people aren't looking at the race as a whole and saying, aha, that's how they all are. They're just looking at that one individual, and that one individual is like, okay, that person should be locked up or put away, or, you know, let's bring him to a jury of his peers, give him due process of law, and let the sentencing fall where it may. So in other words, it doesn't matter, you know, if a person has a misdemeanor or whatever, so long as this person hasn't harmed a child or a woman or committed just outlandish murder, you know, then the point is this: you can't have someone shoot up an entire church only to apprehend them and take them to Burger King and then murder somebody for, say, jaywalking. That's not how due process is supposed to work. And to replace a negative situation, it's not about replacing it with anarchy. It's about replacing it with a system that's going to be just and fair for all citizens of that particular country, city, state, and fair to people regardless of what their heritage may be. And that's it in a nutshell. You know, that's why we've been saying it loud, I'm black and I'm proud. You know, me, this line fits best. I've worked jobs with my feet in my hands, but all the work I did was for the other man. Now, all we demand is a chance to do things for ourselves. We're tired of beating our head against the wall and working for someone else. I mean, that's it. If we've been disenfranchised, then we got to start becoming creators and owning our creations. We have to be inventors. We used to invent a lot of stuff: traffic light, gas mask, Dr. Charles Drew, developed the blood transfusion, but was in an accident and was refused admission to the hospital because they didn't allow black people into the hospital, and he died right there on the hospital steps. So for those of you that hate us on the way we look, and if you've ever had yourself or a family member that was ever in need of a blood transfusion, yeah, you owe us a bit of thanks, because that was Dr. Charles Drew that developed that. You've heard me talk about ownership, because that was something that Prince valued a lot of. It was also something my dad was very fond of as well. He got tired of just working dead end stuff and went into business for himself. It wasn't the most glamorous thing on earth, and as a kid it was a challenge for me to try to sell it as something cool. But freelance medical indexing, ladies and gentlemen, and that's my point. We have to be creative and come up with our own. If doors are continuously still, even in the 21st century, shut in our face, then like the Japanese, yeah, they lost World War II, but they didn't tear up nothing. They didn't riot. They didn't even call anybody any names. But they studied. They studied the game. They played it like chess. Okay, well, we see what they value the most: money. So we're going to come up economically. So they started developing the technology, the Walkman and televisions and automobiles, motorcycles. And for a good long while, they were better than anything that was ever developed over on this side. And with that economic power, they started buying up all kind of real estate over here. They bought up Citicorp. And for those of you who are old enough to remember CBS, Columbia Records, Columbia Studios, what do we call it now? They still have the little Columbia with the lady with the torch and all that stuff. When you watch a Columbia, or, well, it's Sony now, boys and girls. So whenever you watch that, they still have that representing Columbia, but it's Sony on the paychecks, ladies and gentlemen. It's their name on the paychecks, their name on the building, too. And they're still competitive and competing. In fact, they still got Spider-Man. They share it with Marvel and Disney, but Sony's got Spider-Man. So, that's what we have to do. And again, there's room at the top for everybody, and it's just fair competition. You look at all this stuff going with the U.S. and China. Got businesses over there manufacturing because it's cheap labor or whatever, and make no bones about it, they want to either be just as good or better than the United States. So my thing is, hey, there's brilliance, all colors, brilliance, geniuses, inventors, workers, you name it. Let's stop all this hating stuff. Let's get together and we can come up. And if, the U.S. is the greatest place on earth, then, we got to get over all this crazy stuff and do that. But the way to do it, yeah, we got to have these uncomfortable dialogues. Like I said, maybe the way to get there, I think Samuel L. Jackson said it best. It's like being in labor. These are the labor pains now. And hopefully what we come out of this is a better world. Show these people that, like I said, are just so blind and so inert and so hopelessly dependent on hate that you'll gain a lot more by not hating and maybe just kind of deprogramming and get over that superior stuff, because it's like, it's all the same blood, folks. Of course, we got the melanin, but, we got to get there together. We got to, get over this hate stuff big time. And like I said, if there's a problem with that, then the problem isn't with us, it's with you. And you got to work that out while you're on this plane of existence. And you probably just need to work that out by yourself, because we already done spelled it out. You just need to put the letters together and make a better day. So, like I said, we're a people. We like the birds and the bees, but we rather die on our feet than keep living on our knees. And it's not just us. There's people all across the planet that, how Steve Rogers said it, I don't like bullies. I don't care where they come from. And that's just it in a nutshell. There's no more room for oppression. Because I'm telling you, either Mother Nature's going to straighten us out, or there's going to be something hitting this planet that we all going to need to be on the same page. Because they're already looking at it and saying, oh, well, they're already divided. Oh, it'll be easy to conquer. And it'll be all of us hemmed up. We're going to be coming up with songs talking about we human beings and we proud. And even that won't be enough. We're going to need some laser guns or something. But like I said, the bottom line is that this is still relevant and still needed. And we got to get to that step so we can really get the healing process going. And granted, won't be overnight. Like I said, we're over almost 60 years. Depending on, well, as far as the Civil Rights Act, but the Civil Rights Movement itself is definitely, we're not even at 100 years yet. And even that has not done, it hasn't changed 400 years of oppression overnight. And it's going to take a little more time. And this is probably just the next step in the evolution of it. So, like I said, for those, listening to Amari Purple Talk, like I said, it's been a long one today. But, like I said, there's so much. And me sharing this with you, yeah, it helps me deal with it because it's heavy. It's heavy. We're dealing with pandemics still. There's still these things that are still coming to light. Still things that are still on camera. And granted, all the different dialogue for and against, yes, get it all out there so we can see who's who, who's what. And like I said, let's figure out what, separate the illusion. Because like I said, there's other things attaching itself to Black Lives Matter that have little or nothing to do with it. So we have to be careful of that too, because we number one, don't want it washed aside, because we'll be right back where we started from. And at the same time, you don't want outside elements that will undermine it to keep progress from happening. There's no crime in being one happy planet. The crime is in one agenda that forces that narrative in a way that takes away the illusion of, it takes away from free will. We all want to be one happy planet, but we also want to be able to feed our families. You hear all this stuff like it's socialism or it's communism. Well, if you really look at it from one agenda, there's some certain parties that look like they're pulling the strings, if you look at it from that level. But you have to think for yourself and do your own homework. Communism is bad because usually the perpetrators of that, it was backed by a military-based government. And that's what made it bad. Yes, the people were being fed, and yes, the people were being taken care of, but the conditions, were worse than any, rundown neighborhood here. So to do it in a humane sort of way where, your government's not taking the lion's share of things and leaving you with the scraps. There's no harm in being responsible or being humane or having compassion for people. That's not communism. That's not socialism or whatever label you want to put on it. That's just being humane. That's what we're supposed to strive for. I aspire to do something different. That's just the way it goes. It's like pay people fairly. All this, like I said, we're supposed to be essential, but where I'm at, no hazard pay, no, extra raise just for, during the period of whatever the lockdown conditions, none of that. Supposed to be enforcing rules, and it's like, because you don't want to confront nobody, and then it's getting a little decisive. But let me put it to you this way. I'm not going to really take the time out to ask you if you're an assassin, but I'm damn sure going to treat you like one. And that just means, that I'm going to do my best to protect myself, because like I said, this is, we're still in the middle of a pandemic. So, hey, that's your free will to choose to not want to mask up. Then, don't get mad if, I'm still going to be 6 feet away from you talking to you. Or if you hit that cough, I'm still looking at you sideways. Because my thing is like this. I'm not really an in-depth conspiracy theorist. But there's so many moving parts. And because there's no one with any real clear answers, there's no world leader you can turn to. There's not a scientist you can turn to. You can guess the CDC guidelines. You can try to follow those the best you can, or you could choose not to follow those. So with that being said, they're still saying we need to mask up. So I'm not taking any chances. And, you cats need to vitamin up too. Protect that immune system. So whatever this is, whether you believe in it or not, if that's what you're doing and you're running around without a mask, then like I said, again, that's on you. But I'm covering all the bases. Because I'm wondering, again, if it was never said that people of color were more prone to catching this, would y'all have been in a hurry to open up so fast? Some of y'all, very few of y'all were walking around like John Wayne then, but everybody up until a certain point, it was all kumbaya for a minute. And we were all look out for one another, be safe for one another. And then the minute that dropped, within the next week, there's all these protests. We want to reopen. We want to go back to work. We want to feed. We're hungry. I'm wondering, just asking for a friend, folks. So all that being said, like I said, we're people. We like the birds and the bees, but we'd rather live on our feet than die on our knees. And so maybe, like I said, if you feel you're not being protected at your essential thing, then maybe we all need to be creators or inventors. Get our hustle on a little bit tighter and say, you know what, I can do bad by my damn self. Because, like I said, we're playing Russian roulette with people's lives, and that's not what I signed up to do on this planet. So basically, like I say, we get on the same page just like the rest of the world. Then we can talk about love for one another, working together, and all that. And then, like the song ends, we can do the boogaloo. All right, good God. Say it loud. I'm black and I'm proud. Yeah, it's your bad self. All right, so I've talked you guys' ears off enough this week. If you hung in there this long, thanks for tuning in. Hopefully you've tuned in and stayed this long. Because like I said, it's got a lot of everybody. And like I said, as a platform, this is my perspective. I'm just a guy with a podcast. But like I said, I can't sit here and just be quiet and just watch stuff happen, let alone let stuff happen. So let's keep doing this together. We're Prince fans. Like I said, Prince was about his community. He was proud of who he was too. And at the same time, he had that grander vision, love for one another. He had the revolution and the whole nine. So as supporters, fans, family, whatever you want to call it, then we'll strive to get to that level. If a lot of us aren't already on that level, there's a lot of people that I reach out to, beautiful people, support what I do. I support what they do. Hopefully, I can deal with my little plantation over here and break the chains, get free to where I've got the time to, hey, I can just pop up on other people's shows or something, or, step up my game to have people on mine, expand it, maybe get some video going or something. And there's a million other projects I got to do too. So, that's the thing too. We'll still continue this show with this format. May end up being a little bit shorter, maybe less topics or something, but this will still continue with the weekly format. But like I said, there's a couple of projects that I've either started on or I want to get started on, some things I need to finish up. And like I say, the way that this essentially non-essential, essential thing treats a brother, it changes the dynamics. And especially now, it's like every day is something different. Everything is something new. But it now seems like back to the kind of the regular grind, which meant less time. I kind of dug it when I kind of had the 3 days off, could get more done. But like I say, I love what I do. And like I said, I used to be an owner, used to be free, and kind of took this. Like I said, there's no shame in being responsible, folks, but never mistake your responsibility for your divine purpose as well. Always have a plan and maybe 2 or 3 to back it up, so you were not hopelessly dependent on a plantation situation. Or if you do, if it's a thing to where, hey, all you want to do is just travel the world, then you milk that for all that you can do. And with that out of the way, we're going to end this episode. Definitely check out the show notes where you can follow me on social media. Also, too, please buy some Amari merchandise. We got Amari Purple Talk t-shirts, coffee mugs, water bottles. There's other Amari merchandise as well. Keychains, t-shirts, hoodies. Pick up something. Tell all your friends. And we will see you next week. Thanks for tuning in. And as always, keep it purple and on the one.